not instantly, but within a decade. And the question is, how did it do it? Well, Poland did a number of things. In 1999, just the year before the first data were collected, it decided to change the way its secondary schools were organised and no longer put high performers in academic schools and low performers in different vocational schools, but to leave all the students in comprehensive schools. The result of that was that their first improvement was a consequence of raising the performance of their lowest performers. They didn't say to those low performers, you may now spend your life with others like yourself. They put them together with students in the whole range of performance, and they lifted the tail. They strengthened local government, they increased autonomy for schools, and they introduced national examinations for accountability, having on the one hand given schools more autonomy. They introduced some national accountability. And then in 2007, 2008, they had a major curriculum reform and made education comprehensive for the first 11 years. Academic studies were added to vocational tracks, and universal preschool education was introduced. And that's why you saw in the most recent ones the further increase in Poland. They've lifted the performance through the whole distribution. Now, the conclusion I'd make, and I'm going to make this several times, is this. Effective reform takes time, though it's a little quicker in the next example I'll show you, and that without data, you don't know what you need to do. Without the data, Poland didn't know how far behind others it was. It didn't know how much more it might achieve than it presently was. And without data, you won't know if your changes are having effect. Now let's look at another country, this time a high-performing country that has nevertheless improved. Now let me just interpret this graph for you as I build it. These are the top 10 performing countries in PISA in 2000. And that's the proportion of their 15-year-olds who were at the highest level. And you can see countries like Finland, Canada, Australia and New Zealand had almost 20% of their students at the highest level. And Korea, at the left-hand end, had fewer than 10% at the highest level. Now let me show you the next level, level 4, level 3. Now by the time you're down to level 3, the only country with fewer students below that level than Korea is Finland, next to it. So Korea didn't have many high performers, but it's clearly not going to have many low performers. If we go to the next level, level 1, or level 2, and then add level 1, in the Republic of South Korea there's almost no one left. And if we talk about what OECD called below level 1, there are very few students at that level in South Korea. So on that measure, South Korea looks very good. It has very few low performers, but it's certainly not the highest ranked. I just put the ranks up. Actually, they're clearer on the English one. You can see them in the right columns. And so you get to South Korea, it's 6th out of the 10, even though it's got the lowest proportion of students at the highest level. The reason, of course, that its mean is low is that it's got so few at the top. It's got very few at the bottom and few at the top. New Zealand, on the other hand, had lots at the top, but lots at the bottom. So what's happened since then? There's Korea. These are the top 10 countries in the first PISA. 3 years later, every country declined except for the Republic of South Korea, the one I've shown in red, which rose. And that's statistically significant improvement in 3 years. So how did Korea do that? Well, Korea shifted the distribution of its results. It produced many more high performers, and that pulled up its average. Now, of course, you can say, well, wait a minute, that doesn't tell me anything. That just tells me statistically how to get an average higher. It is to get more high performers. But educationally, what did they do? Well, what they did was to they changed the curriculum. They put much more emphasis on essay writing, which is interesting because the performance improved was reading. But in their curriculum, they put more emphasis on writing. And in their examinations for university entrance, they put more emphasis on writing and not just multiple choice testing in the fashion that they'd been using. So it's a similar conclusion. The reform worked more quickly here than Poland's. It was a smaller change, of course, and the country was starting from a very high base. But without the data, Korea would not have been provoked to do this. It was only the data that showed how compressed their distribution was and how few there were at the top that provoked them to make curriculum and instructional changes and assessment changes that altered the proportion of their students performing at the highest level and raised their mean performance. So let me now show you at the school level how data can similarly provoke change. Now this time you need data on all the students, not just in the school, but in all schools actually, to do the kind of analysis I'm about to show you. Now this is a graph of all the schools in Australia. On the vertical axis is their performance on literacy and numeracy in a national assessment, and on the horizontal axis is something that we worry about, which is the level of socio-educational advantage of the students. Students whose parents are professionals, whose parents are university graduates, give additional advantage to their children, and they tend to be out to the right. Schools with more professional, highly educated parents are the schools to the right on that horizontal axis, and as you can see, they tend to perform better. Now there's a school of interest, School A. Its students are not very advantaged. It's towards the left-hand side of the graph, and it's not performing very well. It's down low on the graph, and furthermore, it's well below the red line. So this is a school doing less well than you would expect, even given the kinds of students it has. There is a school well above the red line, high performing of course, because it's way up the graph, but well above its red line, the red line showing that it is doing even better than you would expect, given the high level of advantage of its students. And some people would say a school like A can learn from a school like B. A school B is adding value beyond what its students bring to the school, and School A is failing to do so. Now, my view and our view in developing this approach was that School A could not be encouraged to find lessons from School B. It should look for lessons among those schools. And these are real schools. School C is a real Australian school, working with students just like the students in School A, but doing massively better. And so we've developed a system for showing School A about schools like School C. But I want to take an example of a school for which School B might be the proper comparison, out to the right. Now we have a website that you can go to called My School. Okay, well, just look on the left for the moment. You can go to a website, you can look up any school in the country. Every school in the country can be seen by everyone in the country. Other schools, parents, the community, and so on. Now, this is one particular school, and in this graph, we show you, just for that school, on the literacy scale for Year 3, Grade 3 reading students, what its means were. Okay, I think we've got the graphs together now. Those are the means that that school achieved in 2008 and 2009. Now, there's some uncertainty about where the means lie, so we put little lines around to indicate the range within which the which it's 90% likely the mean would lie. Now, that's not telling the school something it didn't know, but we can also now compare the school up there with all schools in the country. And there are the national means. Now, this is a school with advantaged students performing well above the national mean. And the pale green now in the little diamonds for the school's name says these are between 0.2 and 0.5 of a standard deviation above the national mean. That's a noteworthy achievement. Now, the school didn't necessarily need this website to know that, because it knew what the national mean was. It knew it was well above it. It could have calculated whether it was getting up towards half a standard deviation better. It didn't need the website to tell it its students were privileged. It knew that, really. But here's what it didn't know, and it could not have known without this website. If we now compare it with schools that have similarly advantaged students, those other little diagrams there show the mean of up to 60 schools with similar students and the 90% confidence range for those means. The lines out are a little smaller because it's based on 60 schools, not just one. And now in Indooroopilly, this school is coloured in red because it's between 0.2 and 0.5 of a standard deviation behind these comparable schools. Now, I can tell you, when we published this in 2010, the school was absolutely shocked by these results. It was a very comfortable school. It knew it had privileged students. It knew it was doing very well compared with the national average. What it did not know was that compared with other schools working with similar students, it was doing relatively badly. This school was comfortable and coasting. So what happened? Well, it just says what I just said. The school was coasting. So the question is, which are those other schools? I'll just show you that quickly. The school was able, and every school can do this, to go onto another page on the site and see where it lies among the schools with which the comparisons are being made. And any school that's in the dark red colour is more than half a standard deviation better than Indooroopilly. It can roll the mouse over the little circle, the name of the school will come up, it can click on it and go and find out about that school. The principal could call the principal of that school to talk about what they're doing that she is not doing. And the ones in pink are between 0.2 and 0.5 of a standard deviation better. So it shows schools where they are, it shows them which schools are doing better anywhere in the country with similar students, and it invites a discussion between those schools. So of course the crucial question is, what happened after Indooroopilly was shocked? Well, the next year, its performance rose dramatically. It closed the gap on its comparison schools. There was no significant difference. The lines around the means overlap and there's no colour in the diamond. And over the successive years, Indooroopilly continued to improve. Oh, sorry, I went one too far, I'll go back. Okay, you can see the improvement in the school. And that improvement was provoked by data that showed the comfortable feeling it had about itself was not justified. And the response was productive. It was certainly provocative information, but the response from the school was productive in the change that it produced. And I could show you many schools like this. Now I want to just go on and conclude by showing you something in more detail that systems can do. A school can look at its own data in more detail to identify things that are common weaknesses within the school and then work at remediating them. Or it can also do the analysis at the level of individual students. So let me first do it at the school level. Now, the state of New South Wales, which is our largest state, takes those data I've just been showing you, gives schools a statistical package that lets them do analyses of their own data. This is being used in all the schools in New South Wales, government, Catholic and independent, and it's also being used by agreement in all the schools in the Australian Capital Territory. And some of the other states have systems like this. Now, I don't want you to focus on all the details in these graphs. I want to just draw your attention to some features. Now, this is just a display for the Year 3 students in a particular school. And that's a national, state level band that I've shown. Now, it's got numeracy on the vertical scale and literacy on the horizontal scale. And you can see there are more, each circle is a student. The circles outside the coloured band are more often out in the bottom right than up in the top left. These are students who are doing better in reading than they are in numeracy. So this school would suddenly say to itself, compared with all the other schools in the state, our results are unbalanced. We look like we're stronger in reading than we are in numeracy by the time our students are in Year 3. The school could look at its similar data for Year 5 and now notice that there's not so many in the bottom right, and there are not more in the bottom right really than in the top left. So by the time the students are 2 years older in this school, the relative weakness in numeracy compared with literacy has been reduced. So that's something they can discover about themselves from their data. But they can also look at every item on the test. Now this is showing in the reading test every item by order of difficulty. The pale green line shows the school's performance, and the dark line behind it, the dark box behind it, shows the state level performance. Now there's one particular item. It's a difficult item. Out to the right, it's a difficult item on which this school is doing not as well as you'd expect. I mean, if you look at its pattern of performance compared with the state level, here's a weakness. Now the school can click on that item and be taken straight to this page, which gives the school the item itself. They can read the item and they can see the results in that box on the right of every student in the class, which students got this item right, which students got this item wrong. And if they click where I've shown with that arrow, they will be taken immediately to material that would suggest to the school what they could do in teaching to reduce this weakness in their students. So all of this is available to the teacher in the classroom on the computer by the click of a mouse. You don't need to go to a professional development program. You see a weakness, you can find information on how to deal with it. And you can see the same thing for individual students. Now in this graph, again, don't look at all the details. I'll show you which to look at. Every student is shown as an arrow going up the page, and that shows how much growth the student showed from grade 3 to grade 5. Any student whose arrow is blue has shown a growth that was less than expected, and they're the students that the schools should look at. And you can see the growth compared with the 75th percentile and the 25th percentile. Now just take one student, this one here, Emma Wood. Now she's quite a high performer in grade 3, she's right out there to the right, but she's shown very little growth between grade 3 and grade 5. She's just above the 25th percentile in grade 5, having been very high in grade 3. It shows you what she scored in grade 3, 493, what she scored in grade 5, 531. Her growth was 38. The minimum expected was 47. The average in the school is 84, and the average in the state is 76. So this is a student with a considerable underdevelopment over those 2 years. And in just the same way as the school could go to resources for a particular weakness for all students, the school could from this site be directed to resources that Emma Wood might use to deal with the weaknesses that she's got. You can click and go to that page, and it shows for all of the items that Emma Wood got right or wrong. So, what have we seen? Without assessment, I make the point I made earlier, you cannot have the evidence with which to identify strengths and weaknesses. We've seen countries discover weaknesses they didn't know about, schools discover weaknesses they didn't know about, and schools discover weaknesses they may have known about, but they can see more precisely and see in a way that leads them to resources to strengthen the student's performance. Comparative assessments can show schools, teachers and parents how they are doing compared with others. They can show what's possible. That's the real benefit of these data. That school that I showed you that was high performing thought very well of itself, but when it saw the data from others, it realised that much more could be achieved than it was achieving. These data can show what is possible. Finland showed other countries what is possible. Poland rose to that challenge and has closed the gap on Finland. And that's the role of summative assessment. But as I've shown you as well, the assessment can diagnose weaknesses from which remediation can be achieved, and that's the role of formative assessment. Now, my task today was to show you that assessment can yield data that are valuable. They can yield data to make judgments about how things are, about where they might be better, and they can lead you to advice that's formative about how to make things better. Without the data, you don't have this level of informed judgment possible. Thank you. Sit over here.
شكرا للدكتور بيري ماكوا على ما قدم في هذه الورقة حول تقويم ضمان للجودة. الآن نفتح المجال للأسئلة، سؤال من الإخوة وسؤال من الأخوات. نبدأ بالأخوات، تفضلوا بالسؤال ثم نعود للأخوة مرة أخرى. فضلا التعريف بالاسم قبل السؤال. إذا ما جهز ناخذ السؤال عند الإخوة. تفضل الإخوة السؤال. جهز؟
السلام عليكم.
السلام ورحمة الله. تفضل.
الهام عبد الله الهاشم، جهة العمل إدارة التعليم بالمنطقة الشرقية، المؤهل ماجستير حول تقويم الأداء في ضوء معايير الجودة الشاملة. أولا نشكر هيئة تقويم التعليم في المملكة العربية السعودية، وشكر خاص لكل من قام بإنجاز هذا المؤتمر القيم، خاصة أن جودة التعليم أصبحت قضية العالم بأسره، كما أصبحت ضرورة ملحة طبعا لنجاح أي نظام، سواء كان هذا النظام تعليمي أو اقتصادي أو صناعي. ولكن هناك وجهة نظر ويتفق أكيد معي الكثير منها. أولا يجب أن يعرف المعلمون والموجهون ما هي الجودة. قبل كل شيء يجب أن يعرفون إيش هي الجودة وكيف نطبقها ومتى نطبقها وما الهدف منها والنتائج الملموسة بعد تطبيقها، سواء كانت هذه النتائج بعيدة المدى أم قريبة المدى. ولكي يكون هناك توعية بالجودة لابد من عقد الدورات التدريبية المكثفة للمعلمين والموجهين ومدراء المدارس وكذلك الطلاب والطالبات لضمان تحقيق الجودة الشاملة للتعليم، وبالتالي يكون مخرجات التعليم ذات تأثير إيجابي في جميع القطاعات على حد سواء. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
I apologise. I could not hear the interpretation at all during that. I was getting static and the volume of the interpretation was too low. And colleagues here can't hear it either. It sounded like a wonderful question. Can someone... it's a shame to ask for the question to be repeated, but Can someone tell me what the question was? Okay, the question as it's been summarised for me is that made the observation that we need to define what we think quality is before we start measuring it. I mean, I absolutely agree with that. But in 20 minutes, my task was, I thought, to show you what we can do with the data. Let me back up. Before you get the data, I absolutely agree with the questioner that you must be clear about what it is you want to measure. So, for example, at the OECD, there was a huge discussion among the countries about what would constitute quality in reading and in maths and science. The discussion, for example, in mathematics was, we won't just measure whether students have learned what the curriculum required them to learn, we will measure whether the students can use the knowledge they've gained to solve real problems. Can they, for example, looking at a problem, work out how to express it mathematically and how then to solve it? So having made those decisions about what you think quality constitutes, you then develop tests to measure those things. And in exactly the same way with the literacy and numeracy surveys in Australia, we develop a framework for the assessment with a lot of consultation around the country before that is settled upon, and then tests are developed to reflect that framework. So the question raised an absolutely crucial point and is completely correct. Let me, if there's another question, I'll see if I can hear it standing out here.
اوكي، ناخذ سؤال من الإخوة.
That microphone's on, yep.
That's lovely, thanks. Morning. Professor Bill Boyle, Chair of Educational Assessment, University of Manchester, Director of the Centre for Formative Assessment Studies. Just a couple of thoughts, and I obviously don't want to disrupt your excellent presentation, and I mean that. It was quite nice to see the words formative assessment appear on the concluding slide at the bottom, and as you said, you only had 20 minutes. But could we just discuss briefly, you gave a number of positional statements for data. So let's digress around a question that says data are disruptive. Your thoughts?
Well, data can be disruptive in positive ways as well as negative ways, of course. But gathering data, if it gets in the way of learning, is disruptive. Gathering data, if it facilitates teachers and students' understanding of progress and informs next steps, is not disruptive. So the question really becomes, as you implied at the start, how do we, as education systems and schools, get more of the focus onto formative assessment and less onto summative? Now, many countries like ours have gone through a process of giving schools more responsibility, but then introducing accountability. Now, our accountability is only for about 3 days in a student's life 4 times, in grades 3, 5, 7 and 9. It's not a great deal of testing, but the results, it has to be said, are somewhat high profile, particularly when they are published so publicly at the school level. Now, what we are moving towards doing is 2 things. One is to have the tests developed and then to develop a whole lot of other resources, other test materials that teachers can draw on themselves to monitor their students' progress through the year. Because just a one assessment of students in grade 3 in May of the school year and then again in May in grade 5 doesn't tell you much at all about what's happening in between. And the people who need to know what's happening in between are the students and the teachers. And you can put other assessment resources in the hands of teachers, and we're doing that, or you can do what I talked about in a workshop yesterday afternoon, what Patrick Griffin at the University of Melbourne is doing, is training teachers to assess in their own way, with their own assessments, where their students are at right now. Not where the average of the class is, but where each student is in relation to what they've just to have learned. So the teacher knows which ones have not learned it, which ones need more on this before they get simply left behind by moving to something they're not yet ready to understand. So there's a lot of effort going into formative assessment in the hands of teachers with their own devices, and formative assessment with resources made available to teachers. So I think the Dylan William and the Black and William work on formative assessment shows its power in elevating student performance, and those are some of the things we're doing. Sorry, Black and William?
Black and William research is now so dated that we have a paradigm in the UK. I'm now talking about 25 years of a longitudinal research project, which exactly predates the 1989 Education Reform Act, which brought in, as you know, the National Curriculum and Assessment, that we now have a paradigm of...
Excuse me?
I can only just hear you, so maybe the interpreter can't. Is it being interpreted into Arabic?
Yes, yes.
Maybe hold the microphone closer.
Okay. So that we have a paradigm of which score-centeredness totally dominates our classrooms against any notion of learner-centeredness. So that's a huge issue. Now, for those 25 years, for 11 years, I was director of that project.
Yep.
We produced endless reports to our government that demonstrated, I mean, ironically, the government was paying for the research, that demonstrated a huge skewing of the taught curriculum. Not an imaginary curriculum, not a fantasy curriculum, but a curriculum that the government had brought in under the title of an entitlement curriculum. You're very much aware of that. I don't need to rehearse that in front of you.
Yeah. So, Australia used to follow England. It doesn't follow it so much now because all of the mistakes you make.
Absolutely.
We have some national assessments, it's true, but we've never gone into the business of closing schools on the basis of poor performance. We've never gone into that negative use of data. I could show you some schools where the improvement is a consequence of low performance being underpinned with additional resources. So we shouldn't get too much sidetracked into an Australia versus England debate here, but I would just make the point that we don't follow all of your mistakes. We make some of them, but we don't make all of them.
My point to conclude, and thank you for that, is
thank you.
I'm hugely concerned about our mistakes.
Yeah.
And the fact that they've trickled down so much that we now have, it's not an inadequate teacher training profession, but a profession that is really required just to deliver formulaic coaching for scores.
Yeah.
And that's the end product of your data-driven
It's always a risk, that's true.
Thank you. شكرا لكم جميعا. شكرا للدكتور بيري بروفيسور بيري ماغاوا على ما قدم. شكرا لكم جميعا. أمام الجميع الآن استراحة إلى الساعة 12 ظهرا. نعود لاستكمال باقي ما لدينا من محاضرات وندوات. استراحة وصلاة للظهر ثم نعود مرة أخرى في تمام الساعة 12. شكرا للجميع.